You notice something in the distillery, you expect it, it's a good aberration, you go, let's use that for something
I don't want to talk about how much whiskey I just got on my blazer.
I was wondering if you could just take a second and kind of explain what you do. Obviously, the role of master distiller is different for every single master distiller across the industry, across producers and brands. Just kind of give us a day in the life of working at Woodford, and then we'll go ahead and dive on in and drink some whiskey.
Sure, sounds good. Well, as you note, Jay, everybody has a different definition or set of requirements for a master distiller. And at Brown-Forman, the master distiller is not necessarily, nor am I, the plant manager. The plant manager runs the distillery, and I oversee and am responsible for the quality of the whiskey. On a day-to-day basis, I am in charge of the whiskey's quality. Also, I'm in charge of innovation. So whiskey innovation takes, as you can imagine, a lot of time in our palate plant, in our lab, doing research. As master distiller, that also involves working with our cooperage, working with our grain suppliers. Again, quality all throughout the channel or the supply stream is so important. So we're very involved in that as well. And as most people know today, master distillers are also serving as ambassadors for the brand. So there's traveling and talking at whiskey fests, whiskey lives, bourbon societies, and things like that. And that could take up a lot of your time or not much time at all. And I prefer that it doesn't take too much of my time anymore.
I think it's interesting, especially to see how travel and stuff like that has changed. And now, is your position, is that kind of the same role across like Brown-Forman and Jack Daniels as well, or do you guys kind of all operate pretty independently as far as like I'm sure you talk to the other master distillers being part of the Brown-Forman family, but I'm curious, if you have any insight into how your day might differ from theirs.
Yes, we do talk because we are colleagues and friends, and we work on different projects together, and sometimes travel together, which is great fun. And the Jack Daniels master distiller does have more responsibility in the distillery itself. And again, that's just a historic practice. Brown-Forman acquired Jack Daniels in 1956, and that's how that system was set up. And Brown-Forman had done it differently since 1870 on our Kentucky side of the border. So again, two different cultures, and those have been maintained over the years.
That's very cool. Now, I'm curious, kind of looking forward to the product we're talking about today, and you guys are well known. You release an interesting kind of limited edition or maybe a batch proof as each of the years go on. What led you guys to go ahead and look at chocolate malt for this specific experiment?
Well, this is one of those, as we say on the label and the press release, one of those happy accidents. And I wouldn't call it an accident because it was expected. But we had made our master's collection the chocolate malted rye, which was bourbon. It was in our bourbon recipe, obviously. It was 60% corn, 15% rye, 15% malted rye, and 10% malt. And it was that 15% chocolate malted rye that gave the chocolate malted rye its huge dark chocolate notes. Now, normally or traditionally, the master's collection has been made the last on the calendar year, because we go into a shutdown traditionally the last week of December and the first week of January. So things can be repaired, all the equipment can be cleaned, people can have holidays. So we make the master's collection, shut down, clean, and start afresh in early January. And that was just a nice break. Well, because we've become more and more busy as the core product line has grown, we aren't necessarily following that schedule any longer. So the chocolate malted rye had been produced, and because it was a bourbon, we decided to just move right into our normal bourbon production, knowing that there'd be a little carryover of the chocolate character, because we'd already seen that in previous Unique Masters collections, such as the cherry smoked malt. That smoky note was in the system, but we cleaned it out because of that holiday break. Well, so because we're going from bourbon to bourbon, even though the recipes are different, the standard of identity is not at risk to flow one into the other. And as you well know, Jay, a few barrels of a slightly different flavor profile that does have a Woodford Reserve flavor profile in it nonetheless go into inventory, and many years later we just sprinkle those into the batching process and everything's fine. But coming off the still as new make, our assistant master distiller, Elizabeth, many years ago, she wasn't assistant master distiller. She was our sensory, one of our sensory experts. She's like, ooh, something's wrong. It doesn't smell like it's supposed to. And like, ooh, when you hear that, you get, uh-oh. And then you're like, yeah, it doesn't. It smells really good. It's different, but it's not bad. It's different. So that, of course, is what you're looking for, a difference, and if the difference is a negative. This was different, but it was good. So let's go ahead and barrel it, because tomorrow it'll be all gone. The chocolate will have worked its way through the system. And let's keep those barrels together, because they can be very useful in the future. And here they are many years later as a distillery series. So again, sprinkled throughout a normal batching process, they would just help add the normal chocolate character that Woodford has. Some barrels just have a chocolate character, and that's from our charring process. But together, collectively, these are really distinctly, as you well know with that glass in hand, chocolate.
Oh, yeah.
But not to the extent of the chocolate malted rye. It's a softer, a whisper of chocolate, thus the name. So this is one of those occasions where you notice something in the distillery, you expect it, it's a good aberration, you go, let's use that for something special in the future.
Yeah, I just had a sip here, and it is crazy. This is chocolate all day long, and it's got some of that nice orange and pepper undertone. And I think you called it something really interesting, and I've seen some people on social media, who've been like, oh, this is just some new experiment. But, this is aged whiskey. This happened a long time ago, and these barrels have been sitting and getting ready for this day.
This whiskey's 9 years old.
That's a pretty good age, and it's got a lot of character, both from age and from the chocolate malt. And you mentioned here just a second ago that your typical flavor profile is coming a lot from how you char the barrels. Can you speak to that a little bit?
When you char the barrel and you have such a high temperature inside the wood, you have that caramelization, the burning of certain wood sugars within the hemicellulose burning within the cellulose, which is still intact. So you have wood burning inside of wood. It's a very neat concept. And the sugars we're burning are not the typical sugars you're going to find on the kitchen table. They're xanose, mannose, mannose, xylose. They're different sugars. They're wood sugars. And as they're burning or caramelizing, they're giving us chocolate, caramel, maple syrup. They're giving us these confectionery notes. Those are just natural caramelized sugars. And some barrels, because of the configuration of the wood, just is it denser or more porous than another barrel? Is this wood all from West Virginia and all the wood in this barrel is from Arkansas? You never know. But where it comes from, how that tree or trees grew, are going to give you different characteristics. And sometimes some barrels just have a really heavy chocolate note, dark chocolate specifically. And those tend to be barrels that burned really deeply. And we burn or char each barrel to the same time. That's the standard, because again, you don't know what the wood is, so you give it the same amount of char, but how that char reflects the wood is going to be different from barrel to barrel. And sometimes you just hit those, and those are the barrels we'll pick in small amounts to give us the Woodford note. And some barrels are very citrusy, as you noted, and we'll put those in. And some barrels, oh boy, that's a lot of pepper in that one, and that one go. So as we build our batch to make our consistent flavor profile, and it's complex and balanced, it requires many different barrels, over 100 barrels, to make a standard batch of Woodford. So this is a case of where all these barrels were very uniform because the spirit itself had a really distinctive, standout characteristic.
So you mentioned like a standard batch of Woodford is about 100 barrels, give or take a few,
Yeah.
maybe ish. How many of these crazy barrels make up the Chocolate Malt Whisper series? Is it, was it a really short run? Was it a long run?
Yes, we used 14 barrels for this.
Okay, so pretty small compared to the average Woodford batch. Interesting. I'm curious. So you obviously guys proofed this, I think, at 90.4 proof.
Right. Again, that's our standard proof. So you're not going to go, it tastes different. Oh, it's 110 proof, and that over there is 90 proof, and this is 105 proof. And now you start losing a basis for comparison. Why does it really taste different? Is it because of the proof? Is it the age? What is it? This tastes different because of the process prior to it and the result of the Whisper chocolate. So there's always, we want to give you one reason why there's a difference, not multiple reasons, because when you get multiple reasons, you really don't know which one had the primary impact.
Okay, that's a perfect. So I was going to ask if you meant, if it was intentional for people to try this against regular Woodford, and quite obviously they're going to exclaim that it's very different because it is. I wasn't sure if you guys were going for kind of a comparison aspect, or if you had proofed it and realized that it was very different at a higher proof.
No.
But I like that. I think this, compared to normal Woodford, it's like same but different. Like it has a lot of the Woodford character, and then the rest of it is just way out in left field.
We always invite comparison because that's why we make these different products. Is you always have the gold standard, Woodford Reserve bourbon, or maybe it's Woodford Reserve rye, as we've done some Distillery Series playoffs, the rye. We've had our Masters Collection malt. We've had our standard malt. So again, there's a core product that's the base, always at 90.4 proof, and then you can now have fun, compare, and then have the knowledge of, oh, this is different because of this one change in process.
I think that's really cool. I always, I get a lot of people in my inbox and people who come up to me and they're like, I put together this flight to compare things, and, and they end up with 4 products that are kind of the same, different mash bills, but then they have different proofs, and some are older and younger. And, and they're like, I couldn't come up with anything. And I'm like, well, there's too many variables there. So
Yes.
it's cool to see you guys actually focusing on removing variables instead of, okay, this one's new, but it's higher proof and smaller batch. And, I think that's a cool concept.
We like to keep it simple. We call it keep it simple, stupid. We think we're the stupid ones. If too mmany things going, you lose track. So keep it simple.
I dig it. Well, that's cool. As far as experimentation goes, obviously, this, you called it kind of a happy accident, but not, it came out different. You guys were expecting different. You barreled it away. Is this something you guys run into with any frequency? Or, it sounds like there's a bit of a methodology, you're doing some of your more different mashes closer to the end of the year when, you're going to reset and restart. But how big a part of the Woodford experience is experimentation based?
Yes, we do have a lot of experimentation, a lot of innovation going on. We don't talk about it because experimentations are experiments. You're learning. And if an experiment works out, then you make the decision to produce or not to produce, and then to what scale. And for example, the Distillery Series is small scale, and the Masters Collection is comparatively large scale. Large scale again is comparative. We're making about 300 barrels of a Masters Collection, and the Distillery Series is 8, 10, 14, 20 barrels. Just depends on what we're doing. Is it a finish or is it a new spirit? So there's a scalability and a feasibility. This experiment is really cool, but it costs a lot, or the resources are hard to get. We can't make a lot of it, but we want to do it. So that'll be a Distillery Series. And the Masters Collection, being larger scale, is obviously, can we get that much of this oak, or can we get that much of that specialty grain? And then it has to fit into our time frame as well, because the distillery has a very definitive schedule on when things are being made because raw material is coming in. You're scheduling people's time. You're scheduling different barrels from the cooperage. So again, it's a very, as we hear in the news today, it's that logistics, that supply chain that you really have to follow and respect. So what we do when we do it is generally very well planned, but sometimes things do happen. This is one of those, we knew something was going to happen, and it turned out to be very good to retain, or else it would have just gone through the system and be part of our normal bourbon production, which is great. Sometimes mistakes are made in mashing, for example. The operator put too much of this grain or not enough of that grain, which means we have to compensate with another. Like, oh, okay, that wasn't planned. Let's see what happens. Now, again, if it's still in the bourbon standard of identity or the rye, whichever we're making, a few barrels are going to be fine. But again, if it comes out with something really interesting, we'll set that aside and watch it. And over time, it might just taste more and more like bourbon, and like, okay, that's fine. Or if it retains some kind of unique characteristic, again, we keep our eye on that.
That's pretty cool. I think it's interesting having to manage not only your in-house flavor profile, but everything that might fall outside of that. And you have to hope that, if they drift, hopefully they drift closer to your flavor profile than farther away, or, maybe that becomes its own fun release. But I'm curious about, so it's chocolate malt rye that makes up the mash bill for this bourbon release, if I'm correct. How difficult is it to work with these other different grains? Like, I understand you guys probably see a lot of grain. You see your standard grains, you're seeing some. Do you factor in how difficult it is to work with some of these novelty grains? And does that play a role in how much experimentation is actually going on?
Yes. We learned a lot early on developing the Master's Collection, the 100% rye and the 100% malts way back when. And there wasn't a lot of good literature on the American side of production on those. So we had to learn. And we made some mistakes, found we needed some equipment modifications and other things. And we adjusted. So now we're old hands at using different types of malts and different types of rye. But the early days, there were a few bumps and scrapes. But again, that's how you learn. And it's very different from doing it on the bench top in the pilot lab. Very small, easy to mop up a little spill or something like that. But taking it out to the distillery on a much larger scale, that's where the magic happens. And then the magic sometimes is like, oh my gosh, we got a mess on our hands. But we figured that out. So those have been good. And some like making our oat grain bourbon, putting oats in bourbon. Again, on the bench top, grinding up oats in our small little mill, that was easy. Running oats through our standard hammer mill, all of a sudden that didn't work so well. So again, you learn. But I think we've got a pretty good handle on various grains now.
I love that.
React.
It's funny because when I saw this come across my desk, when Gabriella let me know about it, it drew a memory for me. I was visiting a small craft producer. They were new, and there was a bunch of chocolate malt, and I asked, like, hey, aren't you gonna use that for something? Is that new? Is that coming? Is that and they're like, oh, chocolate malt, like, we cannot work with it. Like, we don't talk about that anymore. We have not had a good experience. And so I always filed that away as like, oh, maybe this is just notoriously difficult. And their one complaint was that they couldn't scale it up easily, and they were like, it tasted totally different, and we ended up just having to scrap it. And it was a couple of years ago now, so it's interesting that they kind of evoked that memory for me. And it's interesting that you guys have the same problems, even though your small scale is probably more akin to the medium scale of one of these small craft places, and your full scale is many times what they are. But I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, that's very true. And again, it depends on who your supplier is. Do you mill it yourself? You can buy it pre-milled up to a point, and comes in bags. You have to empty the bags manually into the mash cooker, and just things you have to do like that. And again, your experimentations. Maybe they were using too much chocolate malt rye in their recipe, and we didn't. We used 15%. So again, trial and error, learning what's your flavor expectations, how much corn do you have, are you using artificial enzymes, or you have natural enzymes like we do from additional malt, what's your yeast strain all about? Many factors that aren't replicable from one distillery to another.
Interesting. Now, this is called the Chocolate Malt Whisper Distillery Series. Why did you guys choose to name it the way you did, or is that maybe the job of someone over in marketing, or did you have a direct input on why this is called the Chocolate Malt Whisper?
Yes, we've had a lot of fun over the years. I named all of our products for many, many years, and now we've got as we're developing the young team coming forward. Now everybody, it's like naming the baby kind of thing. Let's throw out some names, and we'll have some fun, some fun debates. What's this exactly mean? And so we'll come up with some name candidates, and then they have to pass legal review. You can't say that, or it's misleading, or whatever the case may be. So this was a team effort, which makes it so fun. And I forget, we had several name candidates, all had chocolate in it, like a hint of chocolate. That was like a name. But Chocolate Whisper just won out in the end.
That's fun. I work in software day by day, and every year it comes time for the team to name next year's software releases.
Oh, cool.
And it's always the funny, like somebody like, oh, we got to do cheeses, or we got to do mountains, or like towns. And I'm from Wisconsin, so like towns in Wisconsin. I think it's some places are like, this is what it is, so that's what we named it. But I figured, unless the malt was coming from a place named Whisper, that there had to be a pretty good story behind that. So of the releases you've named, do you have any favorites? Maybe just on the creative process or the name itself, or maybe you just thought it was exceptional whiskey. But second to the chocolate malt, what have been some of your other kind of standout in your recent experimentals?
Yeah, each one, obviously, we like the flavor profile, or we wouldn't put it in the bottle.
Sure.
But some names have been really fun. Like we had some of our. Trying to remember which masters. We had a palette of masters collection, our 4-wood. So it had port, sherry, original wood, and maple barrel finish in it. So it was a blend of all Wood Reserve bourbon with 3 different finishes. So those were the 4 woods. And this palette was to go to Europe, and we had, this is several years ago, of course, the polar vortex, where we hit record low temperatures, and the shipping warehouse got, I think, minus 29 degrees Fahrenheit, and the whiskey got a chill haze to it. It got so cold the whiskey went cloudy, and usually when whiskey warms up, chill haze goes away. But because this had organic matter from the port and the sherry barrels in it, the haze didn't go away. And like, what are we going to do with this? Well, it's very valuable whiskey. We're going to have to sacrifice the glass, but let's decant the bottles and filter it until the haze is gone. And by doing that, of course, you change the flavor because you're filtering out some of those flavor components. So it became a whole new flavor, and it was so delicious that we put it in the Distillery series, and we called it Polar Vortex. So there we used a meteorological term for a flavor profile. And people ask, are you going to make it again? I said, I sure as hell hope not. I never want to see another Polar Vortex in my life.
Yeah. I mean, that's the coldest I've ever been, that's for sure. And even as a Wisconsinite. But yeah, you would definitely need a second Polar Vortex.
Like 60 below.
Yeah. And I don't want to see one of those again, personally.
No.
Now, if folks, so this is rolling out, is this available only at the distillery? Is this going to go out across the country? 14 barrels doesn't make a lot of whiskey, so this is a truly limited.
So the Distillery series is named specifically because it's available only at the distillery in the gift shop. but Kentucky state law does require us to ship a portion of the release to local retailers, which we do, on and off trade. So it'll go fast there, and at the gift shop, we limit you to 2 bottles a person. Used to, you could buy as much as you want within law. That doesn't work anymore. You got to really allocate it per individuals. So it's a lot of fun, and it makes quite for an exciting couple of days in the gift shop for sure. But it's our thank you to people who come to Kentucky, come to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, specifically to visit Woodford Reserve. And they're always asking, what can I buy that I can't get at home? There you go, right here. So as long as it lasts, it's our gift for making the journey to Woodford Reserve.
That's awesome. Now, to kind of close it out, so Woodford also, you guys celebrated a pretty big anniversary, right? 25 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, 25 years. October of 1996, we opened our doors and introduced Woodford Reserve to the world, and that was quite an interesting time. Bourbon was still in the midst of a long decline. Famous distilleries had some major ones that are legendary had closed within the last few years of our opening. There was no Kentucky Bourbon Trail. There was no bourbon tourism, no bourbonism as it's called.
Yep.
They were bleak times, and Woodford Reserve provided a shot in the arm for the industry, a bit of excitement that really energized the other great Kentucky distilleries. And within 3 years, the Kentucky Bourbon Trail was born. Distilleries were opening their doors for tours, and new products, new expressions were being introduced, and that long decline finally bottomed out around 2004 or 5, and now, thank goodness, we're on that upward trend again.
Yeah, like you mentioned, you have to limit how much people are buying. I think that is, if nothing, the best indication that times have definitely changed.
I remember the days when special products would go on the shelf, and they would sit there and sit there and sit there, and now people are waiting in line and buying them all at once.
Everyone's got their lawn chair. I mean, at least from what I see pictures, and the line is just Goliath at Woodford now for releases, which is, it's kind of cool. It's a definite changing of the time. But with your 25th anniversary, and this is what I love to ask people, did you drink something specific, something spectacular, something pedestrian? What did you guys in-house celebrate? 25 years is a big accomplishment. What was everyone pouring that day to celebrate at Woodford?
Well, as you could probably imagine, we toasted and celebrated with the brand expression that got us here, and that's good old Woodford Reserve Kentucky Straight Bourbon, the core product.
I always wondered. I felt like that might be the answer, but I figured I would check. Now, final question for you before we go ahead and take on off, and I'll let you get back to your day. But over your long tenure at Woodford, what is the most, I won't say interesting, but what is one thing you learned that's always kind of stuck with you over all these years, all this experimentation, the change, the rise and fall of bourbon? What's your one biggest takeaway that you remember to this day?
Ooh, that's a tough question. And I guess the one thing is to think of what the consumer expects, because when you live it each and every day, you get so close to it, and you might think this is a really great idea, or maybe that won't work. So we need to really keep in mind what we as consumers. I'm a consumer just like you are. I like to go out to a bar and have a drink of Woodford or a Manhattan, enjoy the product. So we really need to keep the consumer in mind, because if it wasn't for the consumer, we wouldn't exist in the first place. So how do we keep people engaged and happy with the product? And I hope that's what we're doing by expanding Woodford Reserve to the only distillery making the 4 straight whiskey types allowed in the U.S.: straight bourbon, rye, malt, wheat, a wonderful double oaked Masters Collection Distillery Series, of course, Woodford Reserve Baccarat, the ultimate luxury expression of American whiskey. More to come, but that's what we have to do, is keep pace with what the consumer is expecting, and deliver. And deliver the highest quality possible.
Excellent. I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Chris. This has been awesome. I love, like, when you say chocolate malt, this is all chocolate malt all day. I get like big, caramel cocoa, like roasted nuts, that orange peel. It reminds me of those chocolate oranges you get at Christmas sometimes. You're supposed to like smash. Like if I had to pick one descriptor, that is definitely what I'd use. And I think it's interesting. It's fun, and it's been a joy to have you here with me today. So thank you again for your time.
Well, thank you, and cheers, Jay.
Yeah, cheers.